Sunlight spilled across the narrow high street like it was trying to prove the world still meant well. Morning traffic crept past glossy shop windows, windscreens flashing white as they caught the sun. A cafe door swung open and shut, releasing the hiss of an espresso machine onto the pavement. Kids laughed as they hurried past with backpacks bouncing. A bus rolled in with a pneumatic sigh, brakes hissing softly at the curb on the corner near the old red brick library. Daniel Harper stood completely still. He adjusted his coat as the sun hit his eyes, squinting against the brightness. Tap, tap. His worn shoes kissed the concrete nervously. He blinked up at the sky once, as if checking whether the day was really happening. Then he lifted his sign again. Veteran. Out of work. Just need a meal. People moved past him like water around a stone, footsteps on concrete. The city hum rising and falling. Coins clattering into other jars, never into his. Daniel was 42, though the years rested heavily on his shoulders. His hands trembled faintly when the breeze brushed his sleeves. His beard had grown uneven, dusted with gray. 3 hours had passed since he'd taken this spot. A woman in a sharp blazer made quick eye contact, then looked away. A group of teenagers laughed too loudly as they passed, one of them mimicking Daniel's stiff posture until another told him to stop. A delivery cyclist swerved around him without slowing. The cardboard shook slightly in his grip. Across the street, sunlight flooded a cafe filled with warmth. Steam lifted in soft clouds. Cups clinked. Someone laughed at a joke near the window. Daniel swallowed. He shifted his weight and took a half-step closer to the curb. A man in an expensive coat brushed past and muttered, "Get a job." Daniel didn't respond. The quiet after that sentence felt heavier than the traffic point 20 feet away. Grace Miller stepped out of the cafe with a paper cup warming her palms. Sunlight caught the freckles on her nose as she adjusted her scarf against the breeze. She paused at the door. She noticed Daniel immediately. Not because he was loud, because no one else was looking. People flowed between them like a moving wall. She lifted her coffee, her eyes never leaving him. He hadn't raised the sign yet. He was only standing there, shoulders tight, bracing for something unseen. A businessman nearly collided with her. "Sorry," she muttered, stepping aside. When she looked again, Daniel was lifting the sign once more. His hands were shaking harder now. The other end of the street. A bus rolled in and opened its doors. People packed inside in quiet lines. A woman swiped her card. Coins clattered into the fare tray. Daniel watched the bus filled, and one looked at him. Not one. He studied faces. Not pleading, not demanding. Just searching. A gust lifted his sign slightly. The cardboard bent near the corner. "Mate," Daniel said softly to a passerby who'd made brief eye contact. The man flinched at the sound and sped up. Daniel closed his mouth. Grace felt something tighten in her chest. She stepped forward, then stopped. A man in a gray hoodie approached Daniel carelessly and clipped his shoulder hard. "Watch it," he snapped without turning. Daniel stumbled backward. The sign slipped from his hands and skidded across the pavement. For half a second, the street hesitated. Then it didn't. People stepped around the cardboard like it wasn't there at all. Some barely lifted their shoes. Daniel stared at the sign. He didn't bend to pick it up. His hands hung at his sides, fingers slowly curling inward. The sunlight that had felt warm all morning now felt unforgiving. Grace crossed the street. Not dramatically, just steadily. The city noise softened as she drew closer. She crouched and lifted the sign. When Daniel looked up, startled, the light hit her face first. "I think you dropped this," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but suddenly, it was the loudest sound on the street. Daniel stared at her like she wasn't real. "Thank you," he said, hoarsely. Their fingers brushed when he took the sign back. That tiny touch carried the weight of being unseen. Grace gave a small, uncertain smile. Then she turned toward the passing crowd. "Seriously," she said, "not one of you could pick that up." People slowed. Some stopped. A few looked away in embarrassment. Grace looked back at Daniel. "You okay?" He nodded, but it wasn't convincing. The cafe windows across the street reflected them. 2 figures in sunlight. One steady, one shaking. The bus doors hissed closed. The bus pulled away, and the illusion that this day would pass like any other went with by noon. The street was louder. Lunch crowds replaced commuters. Sunlight reflected sharply off every window. The cafe queue spilled onto the pavement, Impatience thick in the air, Daniel stood in the same place. Now Grace stood 10 feet away watching him, not staring, witnessing. His sign shook less. His shoulders loosened slightly. Still, no one stopped at a guitarist nearby received coins in quick silver clinks. Nothing landed in Daniel's space. Grace swallowed and stepped into the cafe line. Inside, tall windows poured in light. Dust motes drifted lazily. Orders were called. Cups slid across the counter. 2 sandwiches. 2 coffees. Grace said quietly when it was her turn. She paid before she could reconsider. Outside, Daniel watched the cafe door without expectation. Grace emerged holding a small brown bag. I got you lunch, she said, extending it. Daniel stared at the bag, then at her. I can't. It's just lunch, she said gently. Not charity. After a long pause, he reached for it. Their fingers touched. Thank you, he whispered. He sat down on the low brick wall beside the library and opened the bag carefully. The smell alone made his breath catch. He broke the sandwich in half with shaking hands. Grace sat a short distance away, giving him dignity. Traffic rolled by. People stared. Some whispered. Daniel took his first bite. His eyes closed for 1 second. A man in a dark blue suit soon stopped in front of them. You can't sit here. Grace looked up. Why not? This is a public entrance. Daniel began to rise. Grace placed her hand on his sleeve. He's not blocking anything, she said. The man's jaw tightened. People like this attract problems. So does silence, she replied quietly. Phones lifted. A small crowd gathered. The man scoffed and walked away. Daniel's hands trembled again. Not from hunger this time. A woman from across the street approached next, composed and detached. Is this the man causing the disturbance? Grace shook her head. He's just having lunch. The woman didn't respond. She only turned away. Minutes later, a delivery van rushed past too close to the curb. It clipped the edge. Dirty rainwater burst across the pavement, straight into Daniel. Cold brown water soaked his jeans, his shoes, the corner of his sign. A ripple of shocked gasps moved through the crowd. The van didn't stop. Daniel stood slowly. Water dripped from his sleeves. The sign collapsed, heavy and ruined. I'm trying, he said, not shouting, not pleading, just stating it. The street fell quiet. I'm trying to be seen. Grace crossed the distance instantly and wrapped her arms around him. At first, he froze. Then his shoulders folded inward. He leaned into the hug like someone who'd been walking upright on will alone. Phones lowered. One woman wiped her face with her sleeve. The sun kept shining. And this time, people finally looked. Later that afternoon, pale gold sunlight settled across a small park 2 blocks from the library. Children kicked a football across the grass. Dogs tugged at leashes. The world felt gentler again. Grace sat on a bench with 2 coffees. Daniel sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. I used to think I mattered, Daniel said at last. Back when I had a uniform. You still do, Grace replied. Over the following days, Daniel returned to the street, not with a sign, but with Grace beside him. Inside the library, sunlight poured through tall windows onto a notice board Grace had taped up herself. Community outreach. Veteran employment assistance. One man read it. Then another 2 weeks later. Daniel tied on an apron behind the counter of a small cafe. The machines hissed. Cups clinked. Sunlight washed the room in gold. Grace stepped in smiling. How's the first real shift? Terrifying, Daniel said with a laugh. That evening, as warm sunset light flooded the street, Daniel locked the cafe door. Grace stood beside him, not as a savior, just as the one person who stopped.